In the land of Hyrule, there echoes a legend held dearly by the royal family that tells of a boy who, after battling evil and saving Hyrule, crept away from that land that had made him a legend. Done with the battles he once waged across time, he embarked on a journey, a secret and personal journey, a journey in search of a beloved and invaluable friend. A friend with whom he parted ways when he finally fulfilled his heroic destiny and took his place among legends. This is the official explanation that was given to us during the opening of Majora's Mask, that supposedly reveals the reason for why we find Link aimlessly wandering a dark forest after completing his mission to save Hyrule at the end of Ocarina of Time. However, this widely accepted narrative that Link, devastated by the sudden disappearance of his cherished fairy companion and dear friend Navi, made the decision to venture beyond the borders of Hyrule in search for her, may not reflect the truth at all. In fact, this so-called legend that the royal family claims to hold so dearly to themselves may have actually been closer to a callous fabrication rather than a fond memory, a carefully constructed cover story perpetuated by the royal family that falsely explains the reason behind Link's mysterious disappearance from the Kingdom of Hyrule, all in the name of protecting him and the kingdom itself from Ganondorf's wrath. To better understand the full implications of such a claim, we first need to put into context a few things that occurred during the events of Ocarina of Time. This game's story unfolded the way that it did due to a young Princess Zelda's plan to preemptively thwart Ganondorf's malicious intentions by basically doing all of his work for him. In order to open the door of time and gain access to the sacred realm beyond it, which is what Ganondorf was truly after, you first need to gather all 3 spiritual stones closely guarded by each of Hyrule's allied races. Then you need the Ocarina of Time, a treasure of the royal family that Zelda keeps in her possession along with a specific song, the Song of Time. Before the game even begins, Ganondorf has already made it abundantly clear that he's after the 3 spiritual stones by plaguing each of Hyrule's allied races with pestilence, famine, and death for not complying with his demands. At some point even further in the past, he also captured, interrogated, and took the lives of the royal composer brothers in order to steal their research on the properties of magical time-manipulating melodies, which specifically utilized an ocarina. If only Zelda had known the full scope of how truly unflinching Ganondorf's persistence in taking over Hyrule actually was. But even so, in the princess's eyes, there was still a glimmer of hope in the form of a plan. A plan that a certain wicked warlock of the West had already caught on to. Once all of the pieces of the puzzle are brought together in the Temple of Time, the Door of Time will open. The only thing that's still left standing between Ganondorf and the Sacred Realm is the Master Sword, the key to the entrance. Luckily for him, and thanks to Zelda's plan, Link just so happened to finish gathering the keys to unlock the Door of Time, and to make things even worse, he also just so happened to be the one person in all of Hyrule who was destined to pull the Master Sword from its pedestal as well. You see, Zelda's plan was to enter the Sacred Realm and obtain the Triforce to use its power against Ganondorf before he could get to it himself, but such a poorly thought out plan was bound to backfire, and to say that it did would be an understatement. To give Zelda some credit though, this scene where Ganondorf chases Impa and Zelda out of Castletown might not have been just some random or inconveniently timed attack, but instead the entire event may have been purposefully triggered by Zelda, possibly letting information slip that she was in possession of the Ocarina of Time within earshot of Ganondorf in order to act as bait, luring him away from the castle while Link secretly went and retrieved the Triforce, accomplishing their plan. She just didn't anticipate that Link would be kept in stasis for 7 years upon pulling the Master Sword, which left the entrance to the Sacred Realm wide open for Ganondorf's return, completely unopposed. As I implied earlier, there is a very good chance that Ganondorf had been fully aware of their plan the entire time, or at the very least, Link's intentions on opening the Door of Time, so they more than likely never even had a chance at succeeding in defeating Ganondorf this way from the very beginning. Unfortunately for them, the man they were attempting to fool was the king of trickery and deceit. This extremely costly oversight on Zelda's part is expressed with deep remorse as she apologizes to Link for being so naive all those years ago, but the damage had already been done. Hyrule was now under the control of Ganondorf, the complete opposite of what her plan originally intended. But what I'm about to talk about next is the beginning of Zelda's new plan, or should I say, the royal family's new plan. Throughout the events of Ocarina of Time, when traveling to the future or the past by claiming or relinquishing the Master Sword, Link retains all of his items and equipment between both time periods. What this means is that when we pull or replace the Master Sword, we are not traveling forward or backwards in time to a point just before or right after we pull it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have access to items we've obtained in the future or the past, such as capturing a fairy in a bottle in the future and still having access to it in the past. But at the end of the game, when Zelda sends us back in time with the Ocarina of Time, something is very different about this scene. If you look closely, we are suddenly no longer wearing the power bracelet that Darunia gave us, and if we look even closer, the spiritual stones are no longer in their pedestal in the background either. After looking a little bit deeper into the absence of these stones at the end of the game, as it turns out, there's actually a very good chance that this was fully intentional and that this wasn't just an unfortunate result of Nintendo 64 limitations failing to load them in during this scene. There happens to be a loading zone in the doorway connecting these two rooms that needs to be taken into consideration. When you cross over this loading zone from the entrance area into the Master Sword's chamber, the entrance area and everything inside of it, including the warp platform and the spiritual stones, are replaced with a less detailed version of that room with fewer objects in it. The same thing happens with the Master Sword's chamber. The room is far less detailed and the blade itself isn't even loaded in while we're in the entrance area. To verify that this wasn't just a Nintendo 64 limitation, I decided to check out the 3DS version and I found some pretty interesting differences right away. In the 3DS version, the spiritual stones now remain fully loaded no matter what room you're in, but the warp platform in the background still becomes unloaded once you cross the same loading zone as mentioned in the Nintendo 64 version. The same thing happens with the Master Sword loading and unloading as well, which means that the developers of the 3DS version intentionally went out of their way to change just the loading state of the spiritual stones to remain loaded and didn't even bother changing anything else, which is pretty strange if you ask me. To make things even more strange, at the end of the game, the developers once again went out of their way to make sure that the spiritual stones in the background were unloaded rather than loaded, even though they just made it possible for them to remain loaded while in the Master Sword's chamber. What this suggests to me is that the spiritual stones were always intended to be unloaded in the background at the end of the game to imply to the player that all three of them have yet to be obtained and placed in their pedestal specifically for story purposes. We do still have our Kokiri sword and Hylian shield, which can only mean that Zelda has sent us back in time to a point after we've already obtained the Kokiri Emerald and ventured to Castletown for the very first time to obtain the Hylian shield, but before we ever meet Zelda herself. At this point in time, we have yet to visit and assist the Gorons or the Zora because in order to even get into Death Mountain itself, you need Zelda's written permission to do so, which explains the lack of Darunia's power bracelet since we haven't even met Zelda yet. And to get past the waterfall in front of Zora's domain, you need to play Zelda's Lullaby, which is also only taught to us by Impa after we've met Zelda. Judging from her identical surprised reaction to seeing Link in the courtyard for the very first time playing out once again during this post-credits scene, this seems to confirm this observation and strategically places Link in a position in time to take full advantage of his experiences and relay them to Princess Zelda in order to change the course of history and alter their initial plan in a way that would prevent Ganondorf from ever gaining access to the Sacred Realm. As a result, Link would then finally be allowed to regain his lost days of youth and enjoy his time in this world growing up in peace, as every child naturally deserves. This was Zelda's promising new plan when sending Link back to the past in the very specific manner that she did. This was supposed to be Zelda's attempt at redemption, but what she didn't expect to happen next was essentially the expulsion of Link from the Kingdom of Hyrule and by her own family. Thanks to Link having only obtained the Kokiri Emerald and never getting himself openly involved in the restoration of the Gorons in the Zoran settlements, Ganondorf's suspicions that Link could possibly be a person of interest to keep an eye on is now far lower or perhaps even non-existent, which will become extremely crucial in the royal family's upcoming plan. This plan involved having Link take into his possession the Ocarina of Time and venture across the border of Hyrule and into a region of densely overgrown forests, an environment of which Link was fortunately already accustomed to. The reasoning for this was so that the two keys to opening the door to the Sacred Realm, the Ocarina of Time, and the Hero of Time himself were both safe and far away from Hyrule, while the kingdom dealt with Ganondorf. Link was supposed to temporarily remain in hiding while all of this took place, but as we all know, things got a little more complicated for Link than anticipated. The false narrative that Link was simply off on a journey in search of his missing friend Navi was just a cover story in order to throw Ganondorf off his trail in case there may have still been some lingering suspicions about him. And as for Navi, well, Link knew exactly why Navi made the decision to part ways with him as soon as his mission to save Hyrule was completed. His Hylian mother sacrificed herself in order to bring her newborn son to the Great Deku Tree for protection, who honorably agreed to raise him without hesitation as a Kokiri. And so, as he grew older, Link became very well aware of their customs and their way of life. But eventually, Link discovers that he was actually not a Kokiri the whole time, thanks to the Deku Tree sprout filling him in on his true Hylian roots, which could only mean one thing. It was only a matter of time before Navi left him, and he knew that. Only a true Kokiri receives a fairy companion, after all. Something he knew all too well after being repeatedly teased by the other children for never having a fairy friend of his own until Navi was appointed to guide him, and even then, Navi was simply doing what was asked of her. I would like for all of us to take a step back for a moment and allow for the entirety of Link's situation to truly sink in. When he was only an infant, both of his parents were taken away from him by the ongoing Hyrulean Civil War at the time, and with no other options, Link's mortally wounded mother surrendered her own child to the mercy of the forest. Raised for 10 years in the wilderness, Link only knew the lifestyle of a Kokiri, so of course, he thought he was one. But the other children were quick to remind Link with their sharp and uncaring words that he was nothing like them. He was different. Wanting nothing more in the world than to fit in and be accepted by the others, Link patiently awaited the day that a fairy would arrive at his side to finally prove the forest's acceptance of him. Eventually, a fairy does appear before Link, but not for the reasons that he was hoping for. Link finds out that the Great Deku Tree, the closest thing to a parental figure in his life, was stricken with a terrible curse. And after simply trying his best to help cleanse the Great Deku Tree of that awful affliction, the tree sadly passes away and everyone immediately assumes that Link was the one who brought death upon their beloved guardian deity. Even after being raised by the Kokiri for 10 years, they still blindly believed that Link was the perpetrator due to their adamant refusal to accept him as one of their own. And while some of them harbored no ill will towards him, the painful overall message was loud and clear. Link was forced to leave his home and his family behind him as he ventured out into an unknown world entirely alone for a second time. But at least he still had Navi, a fairy that was only doing what the Great Deku Tree told her to do. Within mere moments of stepping foot into the outside world, barely even a chance to soak anything in, Link is immediately ensnared by the dangerous complexity of Hyrulean politics. Link, a 10-year-old child that not just 10 minutes ago knew absolutely nothing but the forest his whole life, clearly without knowing any better, is finding himself nodding in agreement with Zelda's terribly thought-out plan, now fully involved in an incredibly high-risk plot to outmaneuver the most evil man on the entire continent. He most definitely still has no idea what's really going on at all, and this whole time, Link has been silently following orders from complete strangers and placing all of his trust in their judgments. After defeating Ganondorf, for a brief moment, Link feels like he might finally be able to slow down and truly begin to understand the world and the people around him. But instead, Zelda sends him back in time, fully erasing all of his efforts and every struggle that he'd just gone through. Now that Link has at least been granted the opportunity to properly live out his childhood years, he still does what he can to prevent the horrors of the impending future by presenting the royal family with his Triforce of Courage, proving to them that his words indeed hold weight, only to be then told to prepare himself to leave behind the world he had just grown familiar with in order to save the kingdom that he had already thrown everything he had away to save once before. I think it goes without saying at this point that Ocarina of Time Link has been through what can only be described as a type of emotional, mental, and physical hell that no one should ever be exposed to, let alone a child. And his suffering only becomes worse with the introduction of Majora's Mask, and the ultimate fate of becoming the hero's shade in Twilight Princess. The hero of time harbors an utterly exhausted soul overflowing with regrets and anguish at how his life unfolded before him, with almost zero control over how it started and how it inevitably ended. As quickly as the Hero of Time appeared and prevented unspeakable damage from being inflicted upon the Kingdom of Hyrule, he was just as swiftly sent away and forgotten by the very same kingdom that he risked his life to protect. As if a cruel joke was being played on him by the gods themselves, Link seems to have been destined to wander not just these woods, but the world alone. Not as a Kokiri, not as a Hylian, or even the Hero of Time, but as a 10-year-old orphan caught up in a ruthless storm of endless misfortune. No time to grieve, no place to go, and no one to listen. And so, wander alone he shall. As an unrecognized, unappreciated, and unbreakable spirit, as it is the only fate that this cursed swordsman will have ever known.